Hey everyone, Smartpants Chess here once again, and we're going to take a look at another CCC11 finals match between Leela Chess Zero and Stockfish. This is actually game 16 where another decisive result occurred. So here Leela's playing white and Stockfish is playing black. And I'll just get straight into the opening moves because there are 16 of them from the book. So the book moves were e4 c5, we went to Sicilian, with knight to f3, knight c6, d4, takes and knight takes d4, and queen c7, knight c3, and black goes in for e6, bishop b3 and a6. So black decides not to take on d4, white plays queen to d2, and black plays knight to f6. And we're into a Sicilian Taimanov variation, and this is actually the more modern approach where black plays knight to f6, white plays f3, black plays bishop e7, white's castles queenside, black castles kingside, g4, there's b5, g5, knight to h5, and rook to g1. And now we're actually at the end of the book moves, and it's Stockfish to play. So we're into a very interesting and dynamic position where white's attacking black's kingside and black is attacking white's queenside, with both kings castling in opposite directions. So Stockfish's first move is to play bishop to b7, which makes sense, develops a piece onto this fianchetto diagonal, and white plays knight to b3, so doesn't want to trade this knight off on c6. Stockfish hits in with b4, hits the knight on c3, and of course it moves to a4, and Stockfish plays knight to e5. So already black's attacking his f3 pawn. But Leela now actually has a rather interesting counter to knight takes f3. So in the game, Leela played f4, attacking the knight on e5. So what does happen if black plays knight to f3 here? So if knight to f3, attacking the queen and the rook at the same time, then white can actually just play queen takes d7, and queen takes d7, rook takes d7. So now the rook's actually attacking two bishops. The knight is still attacking g1. If knight takes g1 in this position, then white can of course just take, let's say, rook takes b7, and the bishop's attacking the knight, and still this rook's attacking the bishop. So black's going to lose a piece. So black can't do this. He has to play bishop takes e4, but even so, after rook takes e7, knight takes g1, white will most likely capture this knight on g1 and then end up with two pieces for the rook. So this is very advantageous for white. So back to the game, after f4, Stockfish played bishop to c6, attacking the knight on a4, and Leela played bishop to b6, attacking the queen. F takes e5 may have been possible here, but black would probably take on a4, and if queen f2, bishop takes b3, a takes b3. I feel like black has a much better structure in this position. White's got a lot of double pawns, especially on the b file and on the e file. These pawns aren't necessarily bad, but black just has a more solid structure, and we'll probably start pushing this a pawn up the board and attacking white. Back to the game, Leela actually played bishop to b6, hitting the queen on c7. Stockfish retreated the queen backwards, and now Leela actually decided to take on e5, and of course black took on a4, so just basically trading pieces off. Leela sidestepped with the king to b1, and Stockfish played queen c6, so he's attacking the bishop on b6. The bishop of course retreats backwards, and now Stockfish decided this was an opportune time to take the knight on b3 and double white's pawns, so a takes b3 is played. Now it looks as though the pawn on e4 is on pre, with queen takes e4, but actually white can play bishop to g2 and we'll pick up an exchange, so we'll take this rook off at the next move. So black can't play this move. Instead, Stockfish played rook ac8, so it starts as harassing this c2 pawn. White blocks this with bishop to c4, Stockfish plays bishop to c5. So there is an option here for white to actually capture this bishop with bishop takes, queen takes, and then take the pawn on d7 with the queen. But even though black's just lost a pawn, they can play knight to f4, and I feel like black's structure is really solid here. White may continue with queen d6, but then black can play a5. After trading queens, rook g3, knight g6, black will easily pick up this pawn on e5 at a later date, and this knight is just vastly superior to this bishop. the knight will have a great outpost on e5, and this e4 pawn does a great job of just covering black's knight for them. So if we go back to the game, I don't think bishop takes c5 is necessarily good for white, and I don't think Leela thought this either. She just played rook g to f1. Stockfish continued with rook c7. Leela played queen e2, attacking the knight on h5. So g6, and Leela drops her bishop back to c1. So now white is attacking this pawn on a6. So Stockfish protects with a7. Leela goes back with bishop to e3. Stockfish goes back. They go back again, and queen b6. Stockfish now does actually allow Leela to take this pawn on a6. So bishop a6 is played. But maybe Stockfish thought this would be really dangerous for white, because let's say they continue rook a7. This could have been an option. Then rook f8 is threatening mate on a1. White has to be quite careful, so you have to play c3. After rook a1, king c2, takes. Just a quick note, they have to take with the king, otherwise they're going to start infiltrating with, let's say, I don't know, rook 8 to a1 would be very nice, and followed by moves like bishop to a3 perhaps. But yeah, so king takes c3, queen c7, king c2, and black has a discovered attack with the queen. With queen c4, there's takes, and queen takes e5. This looks rather nice for black, I've got to say. So of course the d7 pawn may be lost, but now, even though black is the exchange down, they're going to have an incredibly strong knight jumping into f4, and white's pawns aren't exactly great to start pushing up the board. I would probably prefer to play black in this position if I'm being completely honest. Also, this g5 pawn will probably fall at some point as well. But Stockfish didn't go in for this. Stockfish played queen a7 instead. The bishop retreated back to b5, and Stockfish played bishop to d4. So attacking this pawn on e5 looks like it's going to win another pawn back, and even start attacking the b2 pawn if this bishop ever moves off of c1. Queen d2 from Leela, attacking the bishop and the pawn, and now Stockfish continues their attack. Rook a8 threatening mate on a1, the bishop goes back to a4, and the queen jumps in to c5. And the idea behind this move is that if Leela takes the bishop, then queen takes c2 check. And after king a2, Stockfish can play rook a7. If queen takes b4, black can take on a4 twice with check. If queen a3, there's rook takes, king takes, and then queen takes h2. So even though white's got two rooks for the queen, black's position is far superior. The queen's going to most likely start hoovering up these easy pawns, maybe even queen g2, and the knight should be a super piece in this type of position as well. It may take some time, but again I would prefer to play black in this position just because white's going to have trouble holding on to all these pawns. Back to the game, Leela actually played queen d3 though, so she wasn't going to fall for this, and black took on e5. And now we get a lot of shuffling, so bishop to e3, queen a5 and rook d2. I'll just play through these moves rather quickly because I don't think they're that necessary. So basically both sides are just shuffling pieces around, moving their rooks around, trying to get the ideal position and setup, until we get to queen a8 from black. And here Leela actually plays bishop to b6, attacking the rook on c7, and the rook goes to e7 and Leela drops the bishop back to d4. So I thought this was critical because once black plays queen to b7, white has the option of taking his bishop off on e5. So what happens if Leela takes this? Bishop takes e5, d takes e5. Well, I think after queen b5 takes, black actually gets the better of it here, because after rook ec7 and rook d7, if we trade off, and after rook b8, c4 perhaps, and rook b7, bishop a4, rook c7. Again, this is maybe slightly better for black because the knight can jump in to moves like f4, and it'd have a great outpost there and can never be taken. And you have to feel that maybe black will be able to pick up this g5 pawn, or maybe even the h2 pawn at some point as well. It's going to be very hard for white to promote this pawn up the board, and the b pawn does actually quite a great job at this moment in time. But again, it's quite equal, and it's going to be very hard for both sides to win this game. So it was certainly possible for Leela to capture this bishop if she wished. But she played queen to e3 instead, and black continued with rook to c7, again bishop b6, rook e7, bishop d4, queen a8, and a bit more shuffling continued, again bishop b6, rook b7, bishop to e3, and queen a5, the rook goes backwards, and finally Stockfish actually gets a decent attack going, rook a8, rook f3, rook c8, and here finally Leela actually does make some progress. She could have played a move like rook f2, this would have continued the rook shuffling and probably would have ended in a draw for both sides eventually. But no, Leela continued with the move h4, trying to make some sort of progress. But Stockfish really hates this move. Perhaps it's considered quite weakening for White's structure, I'm not quite sure exactly. But now Stockfish seems to get into the driving seat. They play rook b8, rook f2 attacking the pawn, rook c7 protects it, White again shuffles more rooks, there's rook cc8, the rook goes back again, rook b7 to protect the pawn, the rook goes back, and rook bc7. The bishop goes back to g1, Stockfish goes to a8, bishop to b6 again, rook to b7, bishop to d4, and finally Stockfish makes some sort of progress right now. They play knight to f4, so attacks the queen on d3. The queen of course moves to e3, Stockfish plays queen to b8. So inadvertently protecting all these pieces on this diagonal. For instance, if Leela now goes for rook takes f4, black should actually play bishop takes d4. The point is after queen takes d4, e5 would fork the queen and the rook. And after queen takes d6, queen takes rook takes, black should just take the rook. And after rook f6, rook bc7, this is game over for White pretty much. They're going to have a hard time protecting the c-pawn. And White is the exchange down. Instead of taking on f4, White captured the bishop on e5, d takes e5 is played, and I've here highlighted these two pawns because they're really thorns in White's side. The c5 pawn protects the knight on f4 and really has a hard time getting attacked because this e pawn just blocks all of White's approaches. It's a very nice pawn, and black's b pawn also stops White's c pawn from going up the board really quickly as well. So black's got a really nice hold on White's structure here. Leela played rook f1 and Stockfish played queen a7, maybe trying to trade queens, but Leela's having none of that. Queen g3, king goes to g7, rook fd1 and rook bc7. So Stockfish is attacking the c2 pawn now, rook c1 to protect, and queen c5 from Stockfish. So Stockfish is very slowly getting more dynamic piece play. Leela plays king a2, the queen goes to a5, and Leela plays queen to f2. So again there's a lot of shuffling going on with queen a8, and so Stockfish attacks the e4 pawn, Leela defends it, and Stockfish plays h6. I don't think g takes h6 is any good for White here because the king will just take it, king b1 and king g7, and this just helps black, so they can play even moves like rook h8 if they need be now. So after h6, Leela plays queen to e1, Stockfish plays rook a7. So it looks as though Stockfish is preparing to sack on a4, which kind of makes a lot of sense because this knight on f4 is incredibly powerful, probably better than White's rooks to be honest. In the game, Leela continued king b1, so Stockfish took on g5, White retakes, and actually now Stockfish does sacrifice their exchange. They play rook takes a4, b takes, and then queen takes a4. So Stockfish gets a bishop and a pawn for the rook with excellent compensation. Just because this e pawn and the knight on f4 are so very strong, and black has no problems protecting the king. Whereas White may have some issues. They play b3 to attack the queen, and the queen jumps back to a5. And now Stockfish's plan is incredibly simple, just play rook a8 and try and checkmate White on a1. Leela played queen to e3, and black did now have a chance to play rook a8. Could have played it. c4 would have been the only move for White to play, because after queen a1 check there's king c2, queen a2, and White does escape with king to d1, but now Stockfish gives black as having the advantage after queen a3, rook b1 and rook h8. Play could have continued, let's say queen c5, knight d3, And if rook takes d3, there would have been moves like rook h1, king c2, queen a2, rook b2 and check. And after taking everything off, black actually emerges better here. So, as we can see, after queen e3, it looks as though black has a nice advantage. So basically black's idea is to attack on the a file and then also attack on the h file once the king moves away. Black played queen a3 first though. Leela played queen f3 and now they do play rook a8. And we get into a similar variation. Leela played c4 in the game. Stockfish checked, the king went c2, check again, king d1, and then queen a3. So the queen's holding on to this side of the board, and now it's up to this rook to swing across and attack white's king from the other side of the board. Rook cc2 was played to play rook a2 perhaps. So black has to retreat their queen back to a7, but they are still threatening moves like queen to g1. c5 is played by Leela to block this diagonal off, but now black plays rook h8, swinging their rook across as we would have seen. Leela plays rook c4, so this is a solidifying move and gets their rook off the first rank. But now Stockfish comes in for the kill. They've got queen a1 check, rook c1, and they play queen a3 once again, holding on to this side of the board with the queen. If white tries to go for glory here, if like say c6, black has moves like rook h3, attacking the queen and defended by the knight. If queen takes the rook and knight takes and c7, trying to get a queen, black can play queen takes b3, and even if rook c2, they've got queen to b1, and if rook c1, they've got queen to b3, rook c2, and play queen to e3. And if white gets a queen, there's a delicious mate here. This is actually really sick because queen g1 actually leads to mate against white. For instance, if king e2, knight f4, check, king f3 is the only move, and then queen f1. And if king e3, there's queen h3 check, king f2, queen g2, king e1, and queen g1 is checkmate. That's an amazing mate. There are a lot of threats for black in this position, and white's got to be very careful. So white plays rook to b1, and now Stockfish plays rook h3, and we get a similar position to the variation we just covered because the queen does indeed sacrifice itself for the rook. The knight takes, and white tries to play c6. Stockfish plays queen a7 to stop c7. The rook gets behind the pawn, and Stockfish plays knight to f2 check. The point is that even if king e2, black can just take on e4 and has an amazing knight c3 coming, or queen f2. So white will be pretty much forced to take this knight off. So rook takes f2 is played, queen takes f2, and Leela goes c7. And now I just want you to pause the video and just appreciate how accurate Stockfish is. This is actually an immense way to start taking off all of white's pawns. So to me it looks as though there may be a perpetual check here, but Stockfish just finds a way to obliterate white's position from here on in. And we'll just go through it now. So Stockfish plays queen d4 check, the king goes to c2, and then there's queen c3 check, king d1, queen to d3 check, king e1, and Stockfish picks up the first pawn, queen takes e4, the king goes back to d1, again queen to d3, king e1's the only move, queen e3 check again, king d1's the only move because then otherwise queen takes c1, and then there's queen takes b3 check, the king goes to d2, the queen checks and the king goes to e3, the queen checks to d4, and then king e2. And now queen g4 check is played. The point is now that if king to e1, then black will just play queen g1 check, king d2, protecting the rook, and then queen takes g5. So after queen g4 in the game, white played king to d2 to be close to the rook, but then queen takes g5 again with check, king d1, queen g1 with check, the king goes to d2, the queen checks again, the king goes to d1, and now Stockfish plays an excellent move, e4. So basically black's plan is just to try and promote their own pawn up the board with a check and a tempo. For instance, if white now goes c8 queen, black can come in with time with e3, threatening queen d2 checkmate. And if queen to d7 to protect, they've got e2 check. and king c2. There's e1 queen with check. King b1 is forced, and then black can clean up with check, check, and checkmate. So this is really impressive endgame technique from Stockfish. So Leela has to play rook c2. Stockfish checks though. There's king d2, queen to d3 with check, king c1, and now white is in a lot of trouble because Stockfish plays b3, attacking the rook on c2 twice. The rook goes to c5, but then there's queen e3, king b1. Black could of course take the rook in this position, but Stockfish has found a quicker win with queen to d2, rook c3, and then queen a2 check, king c1, b2 check, king d2, and queen. The king goes to e3, but after queen e1, king d4, queen d5 is checkmate, and Stockfish has just played the game of the life against Leela. And that was an immense endgame technique from Stockfish. Absolutely brilliant. So this was another immense game played by both engines, and it's actually dead equal as we go into the next game, which I'll show tomorrow. But thanks for watching my analysis of this game. If you think I missed anything, please do comment below, and also please do drop a like or subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next game. Cheers guys.